I'm Lauren Gilbert. I work at Open Philanthropy on the Global Health and Wellbeing Cause Prioritization team. So we look across different cause areas at possible new areas where Open Philanthropy might invest in the future. This talk is going to be discussing how do you compare across different cause areas. Since we have a relatively small group, feel free to raise your hand or interrupt at any time. Think econ seminar style rules. I'm happy to be interrupted at any point. So there exist many different cause areas. You might choose like a major focus area based on philosophical differences, how you value the future, what your AI timelines are, how you value animal suffering. But even within a broad cause area, there are a lot of different things you could do. You might focus on AI, you might focus on pandemics within long-termism, you might focus on different areas within global health and development, and I know less about what different things you could focus on in farm animal welfare, but there are a lot of different things within that broad cause area. So within global health and development, even the title suggests there are multiple different things you could focus on. Should you focus on health? Should you focus on development? Within health, is it more valuable to extend someone's life 1 year or to improve someone's health but not extend their life for 5 years? So our goal is basically to come up with some kind of framework to compare across these very different things you could do within a broad cause area. I want to preface everything I say by saying these are really hard questions, and reasonable people can disagree on how you value different things. I'm going to talk through some of the ways that Open Philanthropy values things, but honestly, I have some philosophical differences with how my employer values things, and you might value things quite differently. There is no one right answer here. There is no one best intervention in all frameworks. This talk is designed to talk you through how you might think about valuing different strategies or different interventions. It is not designed to tell you bed nets are the best thing in the world for in all causes or in all cases, etc., etc. So Open Philanthropy tends to translate everything into health and income within global health and well-being. Those aren't the only possible things that you could value. You might value freedom. You might value subjective well-being. I believe there's a talk by Happier Lives Institute at this conference. You might value personal fulfillment. There are a lot of different things. We use health and income partially because they're fairly easy to measure and fairly easy to compare across different parts of the world, different cultures, etc. You might disagree. So once you've decided you're valuing health and income, how do you value those things? So let's go through how we think about valuing income first. Suppose you want to give someone $100, $100 cash transfer. You're not sure where you should give it though. Should you give it to someone in Kenya? Should you give it to someone in Poland? Should you give it to someone in the US? How do we compare across how valuable this cash transfer is to different people? How much does that income improve their lives? So Open Philanthropy assumes a log utility scale that applies across the world, where doubling one's income gives you the same amount of utility regardless of which doubling. So going from $1,000 in income to $2,000 in income gives you the same boost in utility as going from $50,000 in income to $100,000 in income. And we also assume that this is true everywhere. So a 10% increase in your income in Kenya is just as valuable as a 10% income increase in the US, even though a 10% income increase in the US might be $5,000 US, where a 10% income increase in Kenya might be $200 US. We assume you're getting the same amount of utility, but from improving your life that much. We also assume that $1 is worth 100 times more to someone who makes 100 times less. So basically, $1 is worth way more the less of it you have, and there is substantially declining marginal utility of income. We've chosen to value doubling in income at 50,000 fictional OP dollars. So doubling your income is 1 times 50,000, so that is 50,000 OP dollars. 1% increase in income would be 0.01 times 50,000 is worth 500 OP dollars. These are completely fictional units. These are not real dollars. but they're like handy scale for us to use. We then think about what is the social return on investment for any intervention we might consider. So what is the value of this investment divided by the cost of this investment? So $100 cash transfer costs $100, like sort of by definition. So in this case, we want to know what is the value you're getting divided by the cost, which is $100. In the US, $100 cash transfer is about 0.2% of a yearly income for an average person. We tend to consider the average person in each country. Obviously, there is a lot of heterogeneity within a country. Particularly in rich countries, you can end up with like really, really drastic heterogeneity. But anyway, we consider an average person. In OP terms, giving an average American the $100, you end up with 0.002 times 50,000, which is $100. So the social ROI is 1. Your return on investment is exactly what you put in if you give an American $100. If you think about an average Pole, they would gain about 2.5 times as much of their yearly income because the annual income in Poland is a little under half of what it is in the US. So they would gain about 250 OP dollars out of a $100 cash transfer. So then we say 250 divided by 100. Okay, so we are getting more out of that than we're spending. This seems like a pretty good investment. But if you think about the average Kenyan, $100 is about 5% of their yearly income. You can think about it like this, that like, when I lived in San Francisco, $100 would be like pretty nice. Like you could get a couple meals out, but it's not like gonna drastically change my life. Whereas even in an expensive city like Nairobi in Kenya, $100 might be half of your rent. I've lived in San Francisco. $100 does not pay half your rent in San Francisco. So this $100 is just like way more valuable to a Kenyan than it is to an American. It makes much more of a difference to their life. So in this case, they gain about 5% of their yearly income, or about 2,500 OP dollars. Then our social return on investment is 25 instead of 2.5 or 1. This drives open philanthropy to focus on the poorest people in the world. We think that money makes the most difference to people who are least well off. And the more that you can decrease the cost and increase the return on investment, say I have a shallow investigation looking at cell phones where if you think that you might be able to get a 10% return on investment, 10% increase in income yearly, off of a $20 cell phone because people are better able to coordinate with their employers, better able to pick up work, then you can end up with even higher social ROIs. Okay, so this is all cool, like income seems good, but how do we think about health? Open philanthropy values a year of healthy life at about 100,000 OP dollars, so about, so like your income is 4 times the amount, basically. This is partially based on surveys of beneficiaries. It's partially based on these are nice round numbers, and we don't like doing math. So if we think that an intervention, say a bed net, prevents a child from dying, who then lives until they're 65, that's worth $100,000 times 65, or 6.5 million OP dollars. Note that because we focus on life years instead of like saving lives, that biases us towards children. If you value just saving a life, you might say saving the life of a 65-year-old and saving the life of a child, you're doing the same thing, you're saving a life. Those are worth the same. Because we value life years, we think that a child will live much longer than a 65-year-old, and therefore that is more valuable. Again, reasonable people can disagree here. These slides will be up. There's a whole, 9,000-word blog post on this, on how we get this number. So we also think there's some value to averting suffering. What if a disease won't kill you? I have migraines. Migraines, definitely not going to kill me. Kind of suck, though. Don't appreciate them. Don't love them. So that makes my life worse. We use disability-adjusted life years as defined by the Global Burden of Disease Study, which kind of translate a particular condition into a percentage of life year lost. So having a case of severe malaria is like you losing 13% of a life year. So let's think about the classic EA intervention, bed nets. Bed nets in sub-Saharan Africa, even. So this is a real distribution of bed nets, an RCT on bed nets in Kenya. They distributed 45,667 nets, and 73 fewer children died in the treatment group than in the control group. So they saved 73 lives through this bed net distribution. So 73 children saved. We think that a child in Kenya has a life expectancy of about 65 years, and we value that at $100,000 per year, 100,000 OP dollars. So that bed net distribution has a value to us of $474 billion. Note that one of the things we do is we try to use like real life expectancies. The Global Burden of Disease study uses slightly different values where they assume that everyone has the life expectancy of a Japanese woman, and we should all live to be 89. We try to use a counterfactual of on average, if you prevent a Kenyan child from dying, their life expectancy is then about 65. It would be great if it was 88. It isn't, though. And this distribution of bed nets costs about $320,000. So we can just divide that through and get a social ROI of 1,482. As you can see, that's much larger than any of the cash transfer options. And that's part of the reason that GiveWell has shifted away from something like Give Directly towards focusing on health interventions, because we value a year of life so highly, and because the beneficiaries also value a year of life much more than they value income. So, questions. I have specifically left extra time for lots of questions from you guys, and I will stand here awkwardly until you ask them.
I would like to ask, how does the survey to value the year of life, how it does it work? What are the kind of questions that are asked in this kind of survey?
I don't have the survey questions offhand, but it is basically asking people how much would you value getting more income? How much would you value averting how much would you pay to get treatment for X? I believe the survey instruments are, there's more details on the survey in the blog post, and I think the survey instrument itself may have been released by ID Insight. So you can see exactly the questions they've asked. Yes?
In what way do you include metrics for quality of life or /happiness of life?
We don't. Not at all. I think that might be one of our major flaws. Again, I think this is very much a reasonable people can disagree.
Yeah.
You had a question?
You mentioned at the beginning that you look at cause areas separately. So you had this overview with the different cause areas, and then you look into the cause areas one by one. How do you account for interventions, for example, that affect multiple cause areas?
Generally, we'll think about we will work if you think about something that is pandemic preparedness, where we might have development impact and a long-termist. We will have the long-termist look at it and get some kind of value, and the global health team will also look at it and get some kind of value and combine those.
Okay, so you actually have some sort of metric that combines the impact on different cause areas from one intervention?
Yes. I can't speak to exactly how the long-termists value things, because I'm not a long-termist. But I'll pick on pandemic preparedness because I've worked on that. We have discussed with the long-termists and also what percentage of the world population do we think this would affect? What is the likelihood of happening, etc. And then we can translate that into this kind of health impact so that we can put both a long-termist and a near-termist health benefit into our calculations. Is it perfect? It is not, but...
Somewhere at the beginning you said something, and correct me if I'm wrong, I misremember that when one of the assumptions you take is that you value doubling income, someone's income from point X, similarly to like the same as you would value doubling someone's income from Y. Where is this assumption coming from, and why have you not, for example, included like empirical studies related to or like utility gain, like marginal decreasing utility after some point of income? I believe in the US it was equivalent to $75,000.
So there's actually an update to that. There's a new PNAS paper on that there is less decline in marginal utility of income than previously thought. I know the paper you're thinking of. I think it's it's the Dan Ariely paper, I believe. There was a paper contradicting it. Both groups have written a paper sort of updating that and saying that actually it looks like the marginal utility of money does not decline as much as they thought. It does level off for like the unhappiest 20%.
Do you remember what's the decline rate then? Because you said this declines but much smaller than what we previously expected. So do you remember?
I don't remember the decline rate offhand. The log utility scale is partially based on those studies. It is also partially based on making it computationally feasible for us because we look at a large number of things. We're a small team, etc. So, yes, we're trying to use the best available evidence. Is it perfect? It is not.
Two related questions. First, do you evaluate like mental health issues also using the scale of like percentage of health?
Yes, the Global Burden of Disease study does have a weight for like depression, anxiety, etc.
And so, what do you think would change if you were to consider subjective like well-being measures in prioritization? Does anything like stand out as like?
Not offhand. I don't know that I have an answer for that offhand.
You just mentioned you have a small team. I'm curious, can you give us some insight on this? How big you are and where in the world you are active, and also your funding structure?
The Global Health and Wellbeing Cause Prio team has 11 people. So we're funded completely by Dustin Moskovitz, to like a rounding error. So he is pledged to give away the vast majority of his wealth during his lifetime. So we have about 50 more years to give away all his money, which is about $10 billion. So global health and well-being is not the only cause area that we make donations in, but we historically have done grants in the $200 to $300 million a year range, and with 11 people, takes some effort. We make grants primarily in the world's poorest countries, so primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, and some in South Asia. The team itself is somewhat geographically distributed. I'm based in London. Theoretically, we used to be San Francisco-based, but that is, post-pandemic, no longer true. So, mostly North America and Europe, but not exclusively.
Because you've done this for a while, do you personally think that there are interventions in development or infrastructure building or peace building or anything else that are maybe not that tractable and very difficult to measure, but you personally feel like might be worth looking into?
So I'm a political violence scholar by training. My dissertation was on political violence. So, civil war interventions are my baby. That I care a lot about political violence and reducing political violence. We released a shallow investigation into civil war. We think the costs of civil war are just gigantic. That it is shockingly really terrible for your health to live somewhere where there is a civil war. Not great for your economy either. The problem is tractability is really hard. Reducing civil war is really hard.
A
Yes?
about the tractability. So you just believe that it's not feasible. Basically, I mean, if you believe if you believe that, for example, preventing a civil war has 10 times more impact than I don't know distributing bad nets, then at what point you decide how tractable you would need to make how tractable the preventing the civil war would need to be if you, to basically engage in it. I mean, it's a
Yeah, the answer is that it's a little bit of a qualitative sense. So we will generally put in some kind of weight for how likely we think an intervention is to work when we calculate the social ROI. And our current bar is about 1,200 to 1,500 for things that we're willing to fund. So bed nets are the bar. It has to be better than bed nets. And as I just showed, that's about 1,500. So if we think that something is 1% likely to avert a civil war the size of the Sierra Leonean Civil War, we can plug that in and see if it is above our bar. Sometimes the percentages are a little bit made up because it's hard to figure out exactly how much. Someone I know is on the board for an intervention, some of you may have come across it before, on cognitive behavioral therapy for ex-combatants to reduce the likelihood of recurrence of civil war. We think that's good. It seems generally good for their well-being, but when you think about how likely is that to avert a recurrence of the Civil War, really hard to tell. So you kind of have to make up some numbers. Yes?
How is polio vaccination considered, considering that the disease is almost eradicated, which means it would be a great long-term gain, but the last remaining cases are so difficult to get?
We don't actually fund anything in polio vaccination. We have looked at it briefly, but it seems like basically Gates has that handled, so we've not looked at it in great detail. That they're putting a lot of money and a lot of effort into it, so it doesn't. We also try to consider the neglectedness of a topic, and polio vaccination not that neglected. I think there was a question behind you.
Yeah. So you mentioned your bar for doing a intervention, and how your grants in, for example, community building or university organizers correspond to that. Do they have the same decision-making process when you decide to make these grants?
I can't speak to what the long-termist side. They calculate ROI in a slightly different way. Certainly, the Global Health and Wellbeing Community Building Program Officer James Snowden uses a very similar evaluation structure that the Global Health and Wellbeing Cause Prio team does. But as for what Claire makes grants on, I genuinely don't know. Yes?
Did you ever experience a situation where you did a health intervention in a country, and as a result of this, the national government reduced its efforts in fighting this problem themselves?
GiveWell includes that. We're the largest funder of GiveWell. And they try to include some kind of funding parameter for that. They expect that GiveWell funding it means that not only will governments fund it less, but other NGOs will fund it less. So GiveWell kind of owns bed nets in some places now, where other organizations do not fund bed nets because they assume GiveWell does. So that reduces their cost effectiveness because they think that otherwise this would have happened anyway. So yes, we try to include that.
I think it's a big difference whether the government would fund it otherwise or another non-profit organization.
Yeah, I think that's true. We do try to include both. Okay, that I have just gotten my time over sign. I think GiveWell is a better organization to ask this because they do a lot more direct service interventions. Open philanthropy tends to be the sort of high risk, high reward side of global health intervention. So we are more likely to do policy interventions or try to shift how Japan is spending their aid money, whereas GiveWell is a lot more of like, we are funding distribution of bed nets and therefore governments are not. Whereas the counterfactual is both easier and harder in our cases, that like if we try to shift how Japan is spending its aid money, we're not really worried that we're going to decrease the amount of aid money that Japan is spending, or possibly we are, but I think that is less of a concern. But also, the counterfactual is less well defined.
Thank you so much.
I have office hours after this, so if you have any follow-up questions, I am happy to take them then.